Welcome back to the Michigan Football Network. And today, as you can see, Riverside got a little bit of an update for those watching live. It might look a little bit different. It should look a little cleaner, a little nicer. So that's good news for us. With that, obviously, it's been a little bit since we saw you. So there's some reasons behind that that are out of our hands, unfortunately. I was without electric for 4 days. So can't really, have a podcast without power, unfortunately. No internet, no chargers, no anything. So with that being said, we are glad to be back on this beautiful, fantastic Friday. It might be a little late in terms of draft coverage, but it's never too late to join the party, I don't think. So, with that being said, we're going to go ahead and start off the show today with some Lions draft grades. Obviously, we're all pretty happy with the Lions draft, I would say. I think for the most part, Lions fans are like, we're not enamored, we're not ecstatic necessarily, but we're like, okay, that's what we needed, and we'll see if those players pan out because, I mean, that's really what it comes down to with the draft. So, with that being said, starting with the first round pick, of course, Blake Miller, the tackle from Clemson. I personally gave this an A. And we're gonna kind of hop into a little bit more like film breakdown stuff too on this show today. So if you're into that kind of thing, definitely stick around because we're gonna talk a lot of it. So for me personally, I really like the player that is Blake Miller. I think we talked about him many times leading up to the draft, and all three of us are a fan of the player that is Blake Miller. So like we said before. 54 starts, very pro ready. He's a very lengthy, kind of built kind of guy at 6'7", like 315, 310, somewhere around there. So he could add a little bit of weight, I will say, to that frame because, he does need to add a little bit of strength because that's his biggest weakness, I believe, is his play strength. And obviously, in an NFL weight room, that's going to make a big difference. So I am not too worried about that, but we'll see. I will say, he's a pretty good athlete. He's still young. For a guy that played 4 years of college, he's still 22, I believe, or 23. So with that, obviously, we're gonna, bring up a very young guy that has a lot of experience under his belt, which is always nice for a team like the Lions that are looking to, win a Super Bowl pretty soon. So with that, now he's got good anchor, good pop in his pads, stuff like that. Really, the problem with him, or the problems I should say with him, are play leverage, and like I said, at 6'7", it's a little bit hard to get good leverage on those guys. So got to stay a little bit lower. He doesn't do a great job with counter moves. He gets kind of beat up a little bit sometimes with counter moves, which obviously Fraley being a great offensive line coach should make a big difference on. And he's got some choppy feet problems, poor climbing angles, and obviously, like I mentioned, the power. So all the things though with Blake Miller can be fixed with coaching, in my opinion. So that's why I gave it an overall grade of an A. Good player, good fit, makes a ton of sense at 17, I think. So with that, James, I'll pass it over to you to give your grade.
Yeah, I give this one a B plus just because, for a lot of the reasons you mentioned. The only reason I don't give it an A is I was starting to get my hopes up a little bit with Bain as he was sliding down the boards. So I'm just like, is there a chance we can get him? But that's really no knock on Miller. Also, for as you said, he's not a perfect prospect, although I am extremely happy with it. He's a plug and play guy, as you mentioned, battle hardened, 54 starts at right tackle. As you mentioned, also he's only 22 years old because he was starting as a true freshman at 18. So clearly tons of upside, and I'm very glad that Brad Holmes in general did not overthink this. We needed a right tackle. They mentioned several times they want to move Sewell over to left. Um, and the one benefit we have of doing the show slightly later than some others is now we have the benefit of the a little bit more hindsight now knowing that Proctor and Maui Goa are going to be playing guard at the next level according to their franchises. So technically speaking, Miller was the second tackle taken besides Fano. So um, excuse me, it's nice to have that plug and play guy as you mentioned. All of his I don't want to say faults because I don't feel like he has like a drastic hole. Like, of course, he's not perfect. He can improve his game, but I don't think when you watch him, you would find that, one or two plays or one or two things that he does like terribly, where like he can be exposed, in my opinion. So while there's still room to grow, he is, in my opinion, that day one starter without a doubt. I know Campbell has already said typical coach speak, like he's got to come in and compete, and him and Borum and blah blah blah. It's going to be Miller. So
Yeah.
I'm excited for the pick. Uh, yeah, if Borum beats him out, then I guess way to go
Yeah.
him. But
And
yeah,
not so good
I'm
for
very
us, I would say at that point.
exactly. Unless we have just two great right tackles, I guess. But
True.
yeah. So that's how I see this Miller pick.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. Ryan, what do you got on this one?
Yeah, I'm at an A+ with this. This was the ideal situation for me. You guys knew that. I feel like I was one of the early ones on this bandwagon, along with Eric Schlitt, was one kind of on the early wave of this. But it almost felt like we had to reach to find a negative with Miller. You guys covered a lot of the things, so I won't rehash that. But one of the things that is interesting to me is leading into this process, I talked about aggregation with the draft and how one guy has this guy here. So, okay, well, he must know something about him. Okay, so then I'm going to put him here. And I never really read a good description of why Miller was consistently in the 30s as far as pre-draft rankings. It was like, hey, he's good. There wasn't really a lot of negatives. Like, Jace, you're pointing out some of the things that he could clean up. You could probably do that with any of the tackle prospects or any of the prospects, even the top ones. You have some issues with, Fernando Mendoza, for example, as a quarterback, as the unanimous number one overall pick. But you can do that with any any pick, any guy in this draft. But it was just kind of amazing to me that everybody now, it's like our mindsets get set to what the pre-draft rankings are. Because I had a conversation with a buddy of mine who said, so okay, but I heard this report is legitimate, that they were thinking about moving up to 13. If it wasn't Proctor, because I had been pushing that was probably a false report. If it wasn't Proctor, then who was it? I said, well, it was likely probably still Miller then, from what we've seen. And he said, well, it couldn't have been Miller. He wasn't rated that high. But that's because what we're seeing in the market. It's not that Holmes didn't have him rated that high or GMs didn't have him rated that high. It's that Daniel Jeremiah and Mel Kiper eating his mashed potatoes on his pizza and his pumpkin pie, they didn't have him rated that high. And so that's what's interesting to me about this one. You guys hit all the stuff on Miller, so that's the angle that's interesting to me, because there really wasn't a lot of knocks. It seemed, as I said before the draft, it seemed like an AI write-up of what the Lions would want out of a tackle and out of a lineman.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you on everything you said there. My thing with Miller, really, like, the only thing that would worry me at all is the play strength and the leverage, but both of those things I think will get completely cleaned up. So, like, I definitely agree. Like, he was easily the most pro ready, and I think that's part of the reason why, and this might sound weird when I say it, but when I explain it, it'll make a little bit more sense. It's part of the reason why he was ranked lower, I think, because he isn't seen as like that top level athlete, or, I mean, he's got a good frame, but it's not like he's Caden Proctor in terms of his size. So it's like, I do understand some teams going for the higher ceiling per se, but I think with the Lions, like we mentioned, it's perfect plug and play, and you don't really have to worry about him too much. So with that being said, moving on to our second round pick, it was originally pick 50, but we traded up to pick 44 and gave up pick 128, I believe it was.
Yes.
And with that, we took Derek Moore, which the edge for Michigan. So as we all know, most of us are Michigan fans here. I know there might be some Michigan State fans watching, but we saw a lot of Derek Moore this year, and for me personally, like, before I go into my film, I will pass it over to you again, Ryan. But I'm a little iffy on the pick. I'm not loving it, but I don't hate it. But Ryan, what's your grade on this one?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think all of us were feeling similarly about him. I'd still give this a B+ because of the value and the fit. That's obviously what they were going for here. It's kind of like be careful what you ask for. If you were bugging Holmes for an edge prospect that does have some pass rush ability and pop, and wanted him to go a little bit different direction, I think the three of us were probably fine with the direction that they liked, which is like more a Keldrick Falk kind of thing. Because just like you were saying, James, with Baines slipping, Baines slipped and then Falk slipped as well. So then I thought, okay, are we going to trade up to maybe take Falk versus trading up to take more? But I like the combination of the abilities. I think he can. I like that they leaned into a guy that has the pass rush presence and maybe build on that run game strength. I think he's got the frame for it. I think they can put him in the system and they can kind of help him learn that, because that's really if you look at him as the Al-Qadim Muhammad replacement, which is likely the role he'll serve. I think he'll have upside as on the rush defense side of things and still be able to provide a lot of the same things that Muhammad did at a lot younger, because I was always on the campaign of, hey, Muhammad's in his 30s, guys. I know we don't think so, but I'm pretty sure he is. More we know is younger. He's got some ability to be molded into what they want, and obviously they probably got some intel from Hutchinson. I always watch the connections of like, okay, if you're connected to that program, more. Just like I felt that way with going back to the first pick with Freeling. I assume they asked Ratledge about a Freeling, because if you're connected to the program and they're part of your program, then you're going to know more about them and you're going to give your GM, your coach, your honest take on it.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with a lot of it. And that's why I gave it a B minus for me personally. Like the trade up, I think was really the issue that I had with it the most. Like we all know on this channel, I do not love when Brad Holmes trades on draft night. It's not my favorite thing to see. Obviously this year it wasn't like horrible. It wasn't anything that I was like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? But trading up for a player which is going to be funny with what we just said, would have been there at 50. We don't know that for sure, obviously, but Brad Holmes said he was his number 2 edge, or number 1 edge available, I should say. And that's why I give it a B minus. I probably would have given it a B without the trade up, but that just takes a little bit away from me. And a lot of the things you said, good length, good frame. He's got good burst off the line. Speed to power is really where his bread and butter, I should say, in the pass rush game. And he's got good leverage, feet. He's really got a good long arm and counter move to go with that. And he's a solid athlete. He can actually spot drop at times, which I thought was kind of funny. We just got DJ Wanham that can do that as well off the edge. So having another guy that has done that at some point, in his career could give us a little bit more versatility. But then, like you mentioned, he is physical against the run, but his run defense in general is kind of poor, in my opinion. It's not like horrible, like, oh my gosh, he cannot play on first down. He's not Cassius Howell by any means. But with that, I do think he's got a lot to, work on with his edge setting, his strength, in kind of everything that goes along with that. So like you said, Ryan, it'll be kind of cool to see what this new kind of style of edge across from Hutch will do. With that, James, what is your grade for the Moore pick?
I'm gonna go kind of right between you guys and just say a B. He's not the guy I would have picked there. I'm not gonna lie, but I also have nothing against him. As a Michigan fan, I have watched every game of his Michigan career, and he's a heck of a player. But while you mentioned this is a rare case where I might side with the fans that he might have been there at 50. And normally I'm pretty adamant against that. And there's obviously the chance he wouldn't be. We jumped the Ravens, who ended up taking Zion Young, so they're clearly in the defensive end market. They have Minter as their head coach, who coached Moore in college, and so there's always that connection there. So maybe that was going to be the guy. I don't think we traded too much to move up those couple spots to get our guy. And the one thing I do like about more than some of the other guys that will say in terms of why they may have favored him is I do think he's a little bit better of a run defender than you give him credit for. What is once again not saying he's like Keldrick Falk or anything, but um, I think he is pretty solid there. I don't think he's gonna do as much of a rotation. Excuse me, as much of a rotation as maybe a Muhammad did. Obviously, as soon as I say that out loud, because I'm like, he doesn't have to come off the field because he can do both. But as I say that, you mentioned Wynham's gonna demand some playing time. So just with his ability, he's gonna force his way in. So we'll have at least a good 1-2 combo on the other side of Hutch there. But I think one of either Moore, Young, Akis would have been there at 50. So I like the player, but the trade up is the part that kind of gives me a little hesitation. But since I do like the player, circling back, I'll just give this a solid B, and I'm glad that we have that running mate on the other side of Hutchinson. It just so happens to be another Michigan guy.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you there. It's kind of funny. Derek Moore was one of those guys in the Senior Bowl that was going kind of viral for his clips. But then, people, it's weird to me because it's like the Senior Bowl and the Combine can kind of explode players. But then Derek Moore was one of those guys that did really well at the Senior Bowl and like went viral, and people kind of just forgot about him. So, I do kind of get Brad Holmes jumping up for him because, like he said, it's my number one edge. And, I do agree with you, James. One of those guys would have been there at 50, but I understand with Brad Holmes' conviction going after him. So now moving on to the next Michigan man that was drafted by the Lions, back-to-back Michigan men, Jimmy Rolder, the linebacker, at pick 118, our first pick since the second round. So the third round was really fun for us Lions fans to just sit there and not have to worry about who we were going to pick. And it was kind of funny with Brad Holmes coming out with the press conference and just being like, yeah, so the second round or the second round just ended, but we're done for the day. He wasn't even trying. He was like, I'm done. I'm going to go home and eat some food and chill. But with that, James, what's your grade for the Rolder selection?
I give this one a B minus. I kind of consider him kind of like the more of the linebacker group. I've watched him play every game of his Michigan career. He is a solid player, but he does not wow me. I mean, to be fair, it was a fourth round pick, so we are getting slightly later in the draft. I do think his cover ability as a linebacker leaves a little bit to be desired. I don't think he's a liability, but it's definitely an area that he can work on. But I do really like him in terms of a run stopping linebacker. He comes up, hits the hole very nice. And in that sense, the run defense aspect of his game, I would even give it like a second round grade. I know he did have two interceptions, but I believe one of them was deflection. And while it does, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. While it does not wow me, I do enjoy the pick. I really like that we went linebacker because I was saying all offseason, I think tackle, D-end, and linebacker are our three biggest needs, and we literally took them in that order. But the slightly confusing aspect is with him being a better run stopping linebacker, at least on paper, we needed a linebacker that was a little bit more of a cover guy to replace Anzalone. So it does give me a little bit of pause, but then I kind of remember the Christmas game against Minnesota when we lost, giving up only 12 passing yards. So we also need run stopping too. So I'm not mad at the pick at all, but I'm not gonna, go out and buy his jersey and say, "Oh wow." So I'll give it a B minus.
Yeah, and I am literally lockstep with you on that, James. I also give it a B minus for a lot of the same reasons, like you said. Obviously, he's a really physical downhill run stuffer type. He's a good athlete. I think a little bit more a better athlete than people give him credit for, in my opinion. Good frame for the linebacker position at the NFL level. He kind of reminds me of Jack Campbell in some ways, like Jack Campbell light. Which will be kind of cool to see them play together. Good instincts, good play recognition, good pop in his pads. He's a really sure tackler. That was the biggest thing that I saw. That man, this dude does not miss tackles. Like he is getting you down, which I love. Obviously, the Lions I think love as well. And like you mentioned, missing Anzalone, like he was a sure tackler for us too, and I think replacing him with Rolder makes a lot of sense. And personally, I see Rolder as more of like a Rodrigo replacement for the future than a guy who is going to start this season. He'll obviously rotate, but like you mentioned, James, the coverage stuff it does worry me a little bit. So he's probably not going to play a ton, but I expect to see him on the field a decent amount. And I mean, think about it. Jack Campbell was a first round pick, and he was brought on super slow at the linebacker position. So just something to keep an eye on there. But as far as his negatives go, his block destruction is not great in my opinion. For a guy that's a really good downhill run stuffer, his block destruction leaves a lot to be desired. He likes to like go around them instead of go through them, which won't work at the NFL level. Those guys are way too good of athletes for the most part. It'll work sometimes, but his lower body strength and over aggressiveness sometimes gets him out of the play. And I also believe his awareness and coverage skills in general is just a big question mark. And then his experience, only 1 year playing linebacker at the college level. So we'll have to see how it goes. But I do like the pick, and that's why I gave it a B minus. Just like you said, doesn't wow by any means. So Ryan, what's your grade for this one?
I did write down all of my grades, so there's some people can check my work to make sure that I'm not lying about this. But I did put B minus as well, so we're straight across the board on that. I for a lot of the reasons you guys mentioned, but I'll layer in some other information. I could see this kind of going up or down. I do like the going for that position. I think one thing about the draft in general, those first 3 picks, I know they like to go off their board, and I know they say they don't want to be position specific, but I do think they went for 3 positions of need with their first 3 picks. Obviously tackle, defensive end, but linebacker was right there too, because that sneakily had some depth issues. I'm still curious to see formation wise what they do with the defense, because I think they're going to keep a lot of defensive backs the way they are kind of loading that defensive backfield, and we'll get to that pretty soon here because we got an addition here in the draft. But the way they loaded it up in the offseason and then added a couple in the draft, I could see that being a little bit more plentiful than the linebacker room was, maybe even last year, that they keep maybe one more defensive back than they did linebackers. I'm with you guys. I think all of us didn't necessarily feel like that was the top one on our respective boards. We did that draft together, and we were picking a lot of linebackers ahead of Rolder for all the teams that we represented. James would know that I'm big on Aiden Fisher being an IU guy, but there was a lot of other guys. There was Bryce Betcher, I thought was kind of in their market. There was a few guys that I thought would have been a good fit, but like you guys said, I think there's some upside with him. I tried to apply the concepts evenly. We talked about Ohio State when we were doing a lot of our pre-draft coverage, and how they had a lot of people that benefited, but we don't know how they benefited from playing with each other. You had Styles and Reese and all those guys helping each other out. Rolder didn't exactly play on the premier version of Michigan's defense, as far as like the guys in front of him, the defensive tackles. Yeah, he had Benny. Yeah, he had some good pieces on that defense more, but he didn't have a traditional big, premier defensive tackle front in front of him. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the NFL with more time and more seasoning. If he is like Campbell, good guy to learn from, and Campbell's taking his knocks, and he learned from Anzalone. So you've got that tree there. But yeah, I like the pick, and I do think they went with something of need. And I always try to defer. It's like, okay, we can have our opinions, but Holmes ultimately has the vision of what he wants. So if this is what he wanted, I like the position pick, and clearly he's seeing some upside and some trainability, because now that's what it's about once you get to the NFL is, can you be molded? Can you be molded into the player that we want you to be? Because a player that I might like, maybe he's not as trainable or moldable. And so, if Rolder's that, then great, and he can be in that rotation there.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a good point about the defensive line making a big difference. So, it could help him out in the NFL playing with those guys we got up front. At 157, the fifth round, the Detroit Lions selected Keith Abney, the corner from Arizona State. Now, he's one of those guys that we drafted, I think, in like the second round, maybe late second, early third, I believe it was, to
I
Green
took him with the
Bay.
Packers, I think, in the second round.
Yeah, and which made a ton of sense. I think nobody called you crazy at that point. I think everybody was right there with you. And then in real life, he falls all the way to the fifth round. So we'll kind of see why that was. There could be some character concerns or some medical stuff we don't really know about. I haven't heard anything, so maybe he just who knows why these players fall sometimes on draft night, honestly, because I feel like when it comes to film, like, yeah, obviously some people are better at watching film than others and evaluating it, but when a guy plays really well, it's hard to say he's not a good football player. So it's kind of confusing why he was there, but with that, the Lions took him, and that's why I give it an A because I love the player at this pick for the value. I think it's awesome. I know we talked about a little bit in the group chat of we didn't love the player necessarily, but it made sense for the team while we were doing that mock draft. But here in the fifth round, it's like a slam dunk pick, especially for the Lions. I think he fits the Lions perfectly. He's a feisty physical corner with a high work ethic and high motor. He's got some versatility, can play inside or outside, good technique, high IQ. He's a track star, good communication skills on the field, really good processing as well. So a guy that I don't really worry about as a coverage guy really at all, honestly. Like obviously he's going to get beat sometimes. I don't see him as like a lockdown corner or anything like that, but it's not a guy that you see some super obvious glaring weaknesses in my opinion. But he also has a really good willingness versus the run. And then, his negatives obviously are his size. He's not a very big player. 5'10", 5'11", 190, I believe. So, the size weight doesn't really do too much for you. And he's got some penalties with his physical style of aggressive play. He sometimes can get handsy and have some pretty bad penalties. So think Terrion Arnold last year in a lot of ways. But with that though, obviously I really like the pick. But the last negative I have on him is he has poor block destruction. He's willing to stop the run, but his ability to get through and around blocks is just not that great. So not necessarily a guy that's going to be a high level run stopper at the corner spot. So James, what's your grade on this one?
I give this one an A. I feel like this is a steal, as you guys mentioned. We as a collective mocked him in round two. I believe it was late round two, and to get him at 157, even if it doesn't kind of pan out, we didn't really invest too much in him, and I feel like the upside is undeniable, as you mentioned. Excuse me. I feel like also, kind of like we mentioned with the first three picks, I feel like this pick as well kind of goes for a need just because Arnold's whatever potential trouble, potential not trouble, whatever's going on there. And Reed missed a few games last year with an injury. I know we signed a couple corners in free agency, but when need meets value meets talent, like this is just a slam dunk in my opinion. I'm pretty shocked that he was available at this spot. And then just to throw it out there because I think it's a um, semi-neat fact about him is he is also a four-time national roller skating champion, and I think I think it was I had the article up here just to make sure the age. 13. He was 13, so he's a long competitive streak, and yeah, it's just something I don't really hear about that often. So regardless of who wins or not, like I didn't even know that was a thing. It reminds me of old school roller derby growing up, but that's slightly different. But yeah, like he's clearly, as you mentioned, a speedster. He's got the competitiveness, the work ethic, and when he is in the open field, I feel like he is for a corner, a big hitter, a more physical kind of tackler than just the, I would say, traditional cornerback who normally would just like would wrap up and tackle. He's a guy that can punish you for that position, and I feel like that kind of just goes on theme with the first four picks of this draft because Miller, Moore, and Rolder are also very physical. So I feel like the Lions really focused on getting back to the basics, getting back to their grit mantra. And I would not be completely surprised at all if the Honolulu Flu came back this year, and whoever plays the team we play the following week um, might be in for a little bit easier of a time post Lions game.
Yeah, definitely, and I can agree with pretty much everything you said there. With that being said, Ryan, what is your grade for this pick?
Yeah, I'm at the same A plus. I don't know if A plus is a viable grade, but I think it's as high as you can go, because I know we talked a lot about Pons because of my allegiances with Indiana, but this is kind of he's a similar play style. I didn't really watch as many of his games, admittedly, as I did Pons, but I thought I liked Pons because I thought he was a very good fit for the Lions as well. And so if you would have told me that Pons would have slipped to them at this level, I would have been very surprised. I'm basically equally as surprised that Abney slipped, because all those things that you said, including some of the negatives, are exactly the Lions type. Even the handsiness, the fact that he's a willing tackler but doesn't always finish the job. Like, you could run through the defensive backs that they've acquired over the last few years, and a lot of them would fit that type, because they don't seemingly want anybody that tall. I know Takario Davis and some other ones, you picked them in the draft, Jace, and there were some other ones that were, potentially available at different points in the draft here that were bigger. And I think all of us can see the vision there, but they like the smaller, scrappy guys. And Abney fits that billing. I do think this was a bit of an indication too. There were some things. I know Holmes has his type, and I talk about kind of like what he looks for, but this was also an indication that he was revising his draft strategy some of the things that you even mentioned already, the fact that he went to go have a meal or whatever in the third round and didn't try to trade back up. They didn't give up any assets for future drafts, so we're not dealing with this in future drafts. They did give up the current ones, but I wanted to make a comment about that, because yes, they gave up 128, and I'm with you. I'm 100% with you on him giving up assets to trade up, especially because typically when he's traded up, it's the results are worse than when he's just stayed at the pick. But this year I was more for it because they have a lot of depth on this team. There's going to be a lot of camp competition, and I'll talk about that more as we go on, because some of these depth guys are clearly going to be competing for some of those final positions, but they're coming in as deep as they possibly can be right now when they have to trim down to 53. I know that other fans may not agree with that, but I think you guys would, and I think it's objectively true. You might not like who you have, but there's a lot of guys that have claim to a roster spot at this point. And then Abney's one of those guys, and I think he will work in that rotation well, because I love the Legion of Whom, just like I like a good pun like the Honolulu Flu, but you don't want to return to that, but if you do, you've got a lot of depth, because they really do have a lot of injury prone guys. And that's another thing that Holmes turned away from. There's a reason they have a lot of injury prone guys on this team. Yes, there's practice issues maybe in how they handle the team, and they're all very aggressive, but they've also gone for guys that have previous injury history and have some injury concerns that they may be ignored to get some value. But then you see the backside of that when you do have to go down the depth chart. So I think he amended that with the strategy this year too.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you there. One thing I've said, the last two off seasons. Last year I said it, this is Brad Holmes' biggest off season, and I think it was at the time, coming off the 15-2 season and everything like that. And then this last season was obviously rough. So it was, in my opinion, easily his biggest offseason in terms of free agency and draft, hitting on those players. And like you said, he kind of revised his strategy, which I think shows a lot of growth in Brad Holmes, because as a guy who's done so well drafting and getting guys, I feel like you don't really have to change it all. But he saw the small discrepancies in problems he had. And as simple as just losing trades on draft night. Like, I didn't feel like he really lost these trades necessarily, because at the end of the day, like you mentioned, we have extra picks, and I was definitely one of the people saying we needed to trade up because, like you said, we have too many players as is. But also just because think about it, how many sixth, seventh round picks really even make the roster most of the time? Why not turn those picks into a fourth rounder, which is kind of what we did a little bit later. So with that being said,
I have a
our
quick note if you don't
yeah,
mind. Um, to add just to the Legion of Whom, because I completely forgot about that. With the additions this offseason, because I know we got the corner from Tennessee, I'm spacing on his name right now, is along with Abney.
Roger McCreary.
Thank you, Roger McQuarrie. Like, there is a legit chance that Rakestraw, who I know he's been disappointing so far, but I mean, still a second round pick from just 2 years ago, there's a realistic chance that he either A, doesn't make the roster, or B, he might be like cornerback 6. So we do have some pretty good depth if he can stay healthy, which I know we haven't seen yet. And then the other quick side note I wanted to put on Pons is it was not lost on me that after our trade that he was taken at pick 50, Lions' original pick. And I remember saying beforehand, if the board fell a certain way, I wouldn't hate picking him at 50. So it is nice to get a corner much, much later, but I did find it a little bit ironic that he went to Aaron Glenn and with the Lions pick.
Well, what's funny about that actually with Pons is a lot of people, a lot of people's pro comp for Pons was Glenn. Funny enough, so he goes to a guy who a lot of people played just like him. So it's kind of a match made in heaven. And then on top of that, getting him with after trading down with the Lions of all people, just kind of adds to that. But with that, there was another trade that the Lions made coming up here. They traded pick 181 and 213. And, at the time, I was really excited because I was like, dude, we just traded up and we're going to get another starter level player at a position that we need. With that said, we didn't do either thing, unfortunately. And I'm going to save my grade for last on this one, just to keep the rotation going. But I will say I didn't love it, so stay tuned for the F. No, it probably won't be an F. Might not be. It might be, though. Now, with that, James, what is your grade on this pick?
Well, you can't call me a homer because I just tell you what I think, good or bad. I gave this one a D plus. The trade up did not make sense to me. The trading up for a receiver did not make sense to me, and it's nothing even against the law, but we just don't need a receiver. Between Tesla obviously showing flashes in his limited role, with us getting rid of Khalif Raymond, he can get more reps in on the offensive end of that. We went and got Dortch from Arizona. I know it's only a 1 year deal, but he can be our shifty kind of guy, a punt and kick return guy. And we got a receiver who I don't even want to call a 1 year wonder because he's only had one even decent season on offense. He's obviously also a return man. Obviously, we're talking about Law, but I feel like we are like best case scenario for him as a rookie, he might be receiver 5. I don't know if he's even going to beat Lovett personally as a receiver, so maybe he's just a pure return guy. But his best year in college was 500 yards and change, so he wasn't exactly breaking offense or breaking defenses and being that game changer on offense. I know we're talking about, pick 168 here, but when you trade 2 picks and especially this late, as you mentioned, you don't know if these guys are even going to make the roster. At least I expect them to because we drafted them, decently high compared to some of the other guys. But giving up 2 kind of lottery tickets, 2 names out of the hat that could be something in camp and make a name for themselves for a guy that, in my opinion, like I was saying, he might be receiver 5, and then I don't think he's a better return. I mean, I could be wrong. I don't think he's a better return man than Dortch, and I know when Kennedy was our return guy in a pinch there, he did a fairly well job too. So I don't really see how he fits this team, to be honest. But the only reason I did not give it an F is in Brad Holmes I trust. So hopefully he can figure this out and maybe he sees a lot more than I do. Hopefully he does.
Well, one thing I know he sees more than all of us is film, so we can always rely on that. He watches way more film than we do, and even though we do watch some, it's impossible for us to even get the film that they get. So, which is kind of, it does kind of suck, especially when we talk about undrafted free agents. Oh my gosh, it was hard to even find a write up on a couple of these guys. So, if you're not watching UNLV football, good luck. But now. Ryan, what is your grade for the pick?
Well, if you are watching UNLV football, by the way, you probably maybe got some money on the game. That's what I'll say, or you're living in that area. But it appears I'm going to be the highest on Law here, partially for the jumping off point that James gave me, which is in Brad Holmes we trust. I think I see the vision maybe a little bit. Maybe that's part of it too. I wanted to do a quick math exercise though too, because this always happens when Holmes trades up for anybody. We then put a bigger weight on the pick. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it makes sense because it's like, hey, you could have taken another player. You're good at drafting later, 5th, 6th, 7th round. You could have gotten a good player there. And so I've always been curious about that math. Like, do we say, oh, we could have gotten this player there and we weight that in? Or do we say, hey, we got a guy like Anthony Lucas as an undrafted free agent. He was graded higher, and so can we put him in where that pick would have been? But that's just more of a philosophical thing. But as far as Law goes, I'm wondering, so we know that Petzing likes to build a system around his players. They were talking about, hey, we're not necessarily going to lean into the let's throw all the tight ends at you and what they were doing in Arizona. And I'm curious if this is a player that they thought could do some things that nobody else on the team currently could do. Because one of the things that I saw last year, even when Petzing wasn't calling the plays, was there was a lot of gadget plays that they were trying to call. And they were trying to mainly use JMO for that because he's the most gadgety, I guess, of the receivers. But it really wasn't working out super well. I feel like Law, you could do some things schematically that maybe you couldn't do with some of the other guys. I'm also curious about your guys' thoughts on if we see him, because part of James's hesitancy, which is reasonable, is okay, well, how much is he going to play? We could have gotten a player that could have maybe played more there, but I'm wondering if he's going to get some snaps in the backfield too, because if he does, the fact that they didn't take a running back kind of makes me think that maybe this is a hybrid position here, and we're thinking more Darren Sproles combined with Curtis Samuel, kind
Percy
of
Harvin
thing.
kind of guy.
Yeah, something where a guy, and the other thing that he clearly is a good fit, because a lot of the other traits maybe aren't a traditional lines receiver, but he is a good blocker too. So you're leaving him in the backfield to block even at times where people are going, oh, I can run this guy over, and then he's a sneaky good blocker. So that's kind of what I wonder. I think it comes down to how they use him, but he clearly showed some skills. We all know that. It's just whether or not they can apply those skills and whether or not they work. But that's where I see the value is he, where is he in the receiver chart? I would probably put him at 5, but is he also running back 5, kind of in a way where he's filling in certain formations where he's getting 10 snaps a game or more, and he's making an impact on those snaps. That's kind of why I'm going a little higher, because I'm trying to see that upside.
Yeah, and I think I agree with most of what both of you guys said. Now, I'm right there in between, I would say. I gave it a C. Because while I do agree with, what you said, James, with, why did we do it? Why did we trade up? It doesn't make a lot of sense. However, I kind of agree with you as well, Ryan, that he adds some versatility and adds that kind of gadget aspect. And the guy I thought of, which I thought one of you guys would mention, is Deebo Samuel. That was when we drafted him, I immediately thought, okay, he's going to be like our Deebo Samuel light. Where he's going to kind of play some running back. He's going to play some receiver, going to take some jets. And partially that's because of the negative parts about his game that I I don't really love the fact that we took a receiver with these issues. So kind of getting into the film breakdown. Obviously, he's got a thick build, really a run after catch guy, really good with the ball in his hands, explosive. Obviously, as we mentioned, gadget kind of returner guy. He's got really good speed and acceleration and change of direction. And honestly, I was kind of surprised by his hands. He's got pretty good hands. He can go up and kind of pluck it away from the cornerback or the safety. But that's kind of where the positives end. Like I said, I don't hate the pick, but I also don't love it, and that's why I gave it a C. But like we mentioned, the production, his routes, he just doesn't have a very good route tree. He doesn't run great routes. He doesn't have great feel for the routes for the corner. And in my opinion, as a receiver, I think feel for routes is the most important thing. And if you ask guys like Devontae Adams and Amon-Ra and Keenan Allen, I think they would probably agree. Routes are all about feet and feel. So at the end of the day, he just doesn't have either of those, and that kind of scares me to his true ability as a actual wide receiver. With that though,
One
I gave it a C because he's got all the gadget stuff that we want.
Yeah, one thing I did want to jump in and say, because I made my notes prior to, or let me rephrase. Since making my notes, I watched more film on him, and one thing that Ryan brought up that I should have mentioned is he is a plus run blocker. I will say that much. I was actually, I would say, impressed with that aspect of his game. Not just in terms of taking his player out of the play, but also finishing blocks. There were a few uh, blocking highlights, which is kind of an odd statement for a receiver, but is what it is, where he actually finished and put the guy on his back. And so, I get that aspect, but I just still am a little confused by trading up for a receiver who, I don't want to say his best trait is blocking, but that's where he showed separation from other guys, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you there. His blocking was pretty high level, and maybe that's another reason why Brad fell in love with him. Because I mean, if you can teach him how to run routes, he could be a pretty decent actual wide receiver. But we'll kind of have to see how that works. But at 205, the Lions took Skylar Gill Howard, the interior defensive lineman from Texas Tech. I personally gave this one a B minus. Because the value I think is really good, but I just don't know if he sticks around as a true rotational NFL defensive lineman. His explosivity, his change of direction are really pretty high level in my opinion, and his timing, and he sets up moves pretty well. He's also got active hands in pass rush specifically, high motor, good leverage, all things that you love to hear out of an interior defensive lineman. However, there's some pretty glaring issues as well. His length is really poor. He just has really below average length, which is going to hurt him stopping the run when he already kind of has some issues versus the run in terms of hopefully everybody will understand what I'm saying when I say this. His hands do not go in the right place on the offensive lineman when he's trying to destruct his blocks, almost all the time. And with his poor length, it allows the offensive lineman to get their hands on him a lot easier than they probably would if he would just put him right smack dab in the middle. But with that, he gets washed down quite a bit. His block recognition and like I said, his hands versus the run just kind of make me say, okay, he has upside, but I'm not gonna really expect him to be anything more than bottom of the depth chart or practice squad guy in my opinion. So that's why I gave it a B minus, because I like the value, but the player, which in the 6th and 7th round, that's all you're really asking for, bottom of the depth chart, practice squad guys. So I'm not mad at it by any means. But Ryan, what is your grade for this one?
Yeah, so I guess for some of the same reasons that you listed, I guess I'm slightly higher. I had this as a B plus because to me, you're grading it on a curve because you're saying, did you get a good value for that pick? And I think it's going to come down to kind of like the law thing. I think it's going to come down to usage for him because the Lions, again, we're talking about how they have a type with most of these positions. They do like these flexible guys that can go inside out. And does he kick out to the kind of big edge format? And if he does that, Is he a little bit more mobile and useful there because he's not having to go through the interior of the offensive line? Some of those questions I wonder about. I also, as you guys know, because we talked about it some in the draft process, but I'm big on the butterfly effect, and if one thing would have changed, and then you see how everything else changed. I'm intrigued by his profile and the fact that he has taken kind of a circuitous route to the NFL and does have some athletic traits that other people don't have at that position. But you also know that Alabama and other teams were in on him when he did transfer, and I'm wondering if he had gone to, say, Alabama, where he would have been drafted. And so that's why I'm a little higher on this, and that's playing with the butterfly effect. And if we change that, then we have to change 700 other things, and I'm not worried about doing that. But I do think it's interesting that some of those other programs were in on him. Maybe he gets a little higher grade playing with that higher competition, because we've been talking about that, and so that's why I put it more upside, especially for the level, because I like the upside for a pick that late.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. James, what is your grade for this one?
I gave this one a B. Ryan gave me a perfect segue there. I graded this with the curve because I like the prospect for pick 205. If we took him earlier, I would not obviously like it as much. He is very shifty, and he's an undersized D tackle. In People are going to throw a fit about this. As a style, I would compare him almost to like an early Aaron Donald, because in Aaron Donald's later career, he started doing more of like power moves, and obviously everyone's seen clips of him shoving guys off of him with one hand. But in those early seasons, he was using much more of speed and finesse to get around guys with his smaller frame. So no, I'm not calling him Aaron Rodgers, but just in terms of style.
Well, I hope it's not Aaron Rodgers.
Oh, I'm sorry, Aaron Donald. Oh, well, you know what? He can be Aaron Rodgers too.
Man,
Whatever.
Aaron Rodgers looks a lot different these days.
Yeah. Yeah, he put on a little bit of weight. Oversized for Aaron Rodgers, undersized for a D tackle.
That ayahuasca has more effect than I thought it did. Apparently.
Yes, it gives you the munchies.
Well, yeah. Well, you never know what's going to happen after one of those darkness retreats. So,
Right.
But yeah, and then the other thing I found when looking into him a little further, obviously I'm not digging into prospects pre-draft this late, but in 2021 he was a walk-on D2 linebacker. So he's only played the D-line position for about 3 years. So it's still new-ish. I'm not saying you can't learn a position in 3 years, but he is, because of the upside, I like this pick a lot. And I feel like he complements guys that we currently have, because we got some pocket pushers and some more strong guys like McNeil. I feel like we do lack that shifty guy. And once again, as I kind of said with Law, if they don't work out, we spent pick 205 on them. And then as a side note, in 2024, he did have 5 sacks from the D tackle position. Last year, he only had one, but he only played in a handful of games. Unfortunately, he had an ankle surgery. And if it wasn't for that, some people said he might have even stayed in college one more year. Or I should say, he asked to stay in college, and his eligibility got declined. So he came out. So while this is a kind of just taking a flyer on upside, is something I don't normally like to do. I'm not a big trades guy. For pick 205, I do think we at least got a pretty good athlete that could do some stuff, especially going back to what we were talking about before, having Hutch, McNeil, Moore. He's not going to be the guy that's getting doubled or anything like that. So I do think he might be able to fly under the radar. And I'm not going to quite say have a, oh my God, I just spaced on the guy's name, 7th-round edge that had like 9 sacks his rookie year.
Houston?
James Houston. I'm not saying he's going to have quite that big of an impact, but he could be a sneaky signing like that.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. And like you guys mentioned, grading on a curve definitely changes a lot of these things, because, like we said, 6th and 7th round, you're really only looking for bottom of the roster practice squad guys, and if you get more, that's really good. And with that, at 222, the Lions drafted Tyree West, the D lineman out of Tennessee. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Which, funny enough, I actually saw him play in person, and I didn't even know it at the time. I went to the Tennessee Vanderbilt game this past year. Will say I didn't notice him enough to remember him. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but I will say I was like a lot of beers deep, so I didn't notice a lot of things. So I will say, going down and doing that college tailgate at the Vanderbilt Tennessee game, I highly recommend it. But yeah, I wouldn't drink as much as I did. That's all I'm gonna say. So with that, I gave it a C plus. I think West offers some versatility. He has some good quicks, some solid leverage at 6'1", 280. And like I said, the versatility is really the biggest thing for me. And he's got a high motor, but he's doesn't have a lot of experience. Doesn't have a lot of production. Kind of a stiff mover. Doesn't have great hands. So I gave it a C plus because, like we mentioned, we're grading on a curve, and I see him as more of a practice squad type of player that could maybe stick at the absolute bottom of the rotation, but I don't know if he beats any of the guys that we currently have out of the spot. So, James, what's your grade on the West pick?
I give this one a C minus. He did have 4 sacks and 7.5 TFLs this year. I don't mind him as a prospect, especially this late. But the one thing that for me marked it down, whether it's fair or unfair, it's my grade, so I'm doing what I want, is there's just a couple other guys that I wanted more at this pick. So with it being this late, and I know we're taking flyers on guy, but I really wanted like a Bishop Fitzgerald here or an Anthony Lucas, who we ended up getting anyways for an undrafted free agent. So that part worked out. But or even a Nadami Tucker, the D end from Western Michigan, who had 17 sacks last year. He just didn't get signed, or he didn't get drafted because he went to a smaller school. But we've seen guys like Max Crosby kind of break that mold before. So I was just really hoping for someone like that. So Wes is a prospect, as you mentioned. He does have some versatility. I feel like he could play some outside linebacker in particular sets if need be. But there was just other players I would have rather had at this pick.
Yeah, definitely. Ryan, what do you got? What's your grade on this one?
Yeah, I'm with you guys. I'm right in the middle of you guys. I'm a C on him for a lot of the reasons you guys kind of mentioned here, because I could see some upside to your point of not seeing him at the game you went to, not because you were having the drinks, and maybe his name also didn't indicate a football player. It kind of looks like Tire West. It sounds like you're going to go get an oil change there. So, but he didn't get a lot. He didn't get used a lot in college. So there could be some upside because he wasn't really at the high end of the rotation. So maybe he was underutilized and he develops to the next level. I can see those things. But to James's point, when you were sitting there, because we do know the draft pretty well and we knew the prospects, there was a lot of prospects that I went, man, it would be nice to have them here. You mentioned Tucker, Fitzgerald, we're all high on. I thought that was a slip, and I really thought safety was a position that they would go for because of the injuries to Joseph and Branch and needing some depth potentially there, even though they did sign some guys in the offseason. Another guy to be a little bit, I haven't been enough of a homer on this call yet, James, so to be a little bit more of a homer, Camaro was on the board at that point too. That's a guy that I could have seen them interested in, kind of similar size to him. So I thought, well, man, if you're going to go for somebody like that, why not somebody like Kamara, who has got a little bit more production over the course of his career? But I want to end this with a question. I'm bombarding you guys with this, but I'm curious. It's funny because one of the concepts, we didn't have to do it as much this year because people generally seem happy with the draft. The fan base does. They took 2 Michigan players, that doesn't hurt, and they took positions that they need. But one of the things that I always argue with a Brad Holmes draft is you have to re-slot everybody, because you have to say, like, okay, he may have reached a little bit in the middle rounds, but then he got some value picks in the later rounds. He got a Mahogany, he got a Frazier, he got whoever, and then you got to slot them back up. It's kind of similar to me in this sense. It's because you look at who, the UDFAs, and we're going to talk about them a little bit, but it's like, what if they took Anthony Lucas here? What grade would we have been giving it? I feel like we would have given it a higher grade, and then they picked him up, but to to all of our points, they did have a lot of people that were on the table there that you don't have to get to UDFA, because that's the question too. There might have been guys that they were interested in, thought they could get them UDFA, and then they couldn't. I would want to be a fly on the wall in the facility and see who they called that maybe are even some of the names that we mentioned, thinking they could get them UDFA, and they took West instead of them. That's the tough part for me to kind of visualize and understand.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. When you kind of reslot stuff, it changes a lot of stuff. Like that one draft we had a few years ago where it was Campbell and Branch. People were like, if you just swap Campbell and Branch, it's an A++. But because you don't, it's an A+ or an A. You know what I mean? It's like people are a little like Jack Campbell is maybe not a first round pick and all that. So, and I think with this draft, even if you swap Rolder and Abney, I think people go, oh, totally fine. Love it. No problem at all. But with that, speaking of the UDFAs, because that is what we're going to get to next, before we get there, we're going to stop for a quick ad break here. If you're looking for some new gear as your team drafts, signs, and adds players, or you're just totally disowning them because you think that they reached on every player, Jaguars. But if you're doing any of those things, if you're looking for some new apparel, check out Fanatics. The link will be in the description. It's a great place to find some affordable sportswear, I would say. I really like their NBA jerseys and things like that. So check them out. And if you want to do your own 2027 mock draft, because that's where we're currently at, I've seen a handful of those. I know it's a little early, but if you're into that kind of thing, check out sticktothemodel.com, and you can even be the GM for the entire season. I think that's a pretty cool thing that they added to their mock draft sim. You can just be a GM for the whole off season, the full season. You can kind of see how things actually play out for the team that you built. So check them out. The link will be in the description, sticktothemodel.com, and use our code MFN2026 to save at checkout. So with that, moving on to the undrafted free agents of the Detroit Lions. And obviously we're not going to spend as much time on these as we did the actual draft, because there's just not a lot of information out there necessarily, and who knows if these guys even make the practice squad, let alone the actual roster. So starting with the edge, Eric O'Neill from Rutgers, just a few notes I had on him. Good play strength, high motor, efficient hands. He's got a good rush arc and good read and react. He's got some special teams upside, I think, as he's an edge player, but he's built a little bit more like a linebacker, so he could kind of be that kind of guy on special teams. His rush plan, his anchor, and his speed in general just don't do a lot for me, so I doubt he plays a lot of actual defense for us. I see him as more of a special teamer. So, James, what are your thoughts on this one?
I don't know too much about the guy, to be honest with you. I have two guys that I kind of circled, which I also see that are about to be talked about. But other than that, really the tight end from Tennessee is the only other guy I really have a note on.
Okay, gotcha. Good to know. Ryan, do you got anything on this one?
Yeah, not in particular. I'm kind of in the same category as James, where I have some general thoughts on the free agent side of things, but I haven't watched a lot of tape on him or anything, but kind of defer to you. I like what I've seen from the tape that I have seen, and the fact that he does have some versatility, but I at this point, when they grabbed him, which will be a difference between him and some of the other guys that we analyzed, it's hard for me to see a fit even on the practice squad for him. We'll see how that all shakes out. There's a lot that will happen in between, but even after the draft, they made some acquisitions that made it harder for him to make the roster. So there's some guys where I'm not trying to write him off already, because on the Lions, of any team, they can play their way onto the team. They can claim their spot and find their way onto the practice squad or the team in general. But there's a few guys that it seems a little less likely than others, and he's kind of in that category to me. But I hope he proves me wrong. It's nothing against him.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. It's going to be tough for, honestly, all of these guys to make the practice squad, let alone the roster. So, like I said, really not a lot to say. In terms of Miles Kitselman, though, the Tennessee tight end, he's a blocker in my opinion. Not a real good athlete, but he's a pretty decent blocker. So he's a guy that obviously will probably not make the roster, but he could offer some upside as a practice squad tight end. If you have to bring him up to like play, I don't know. Tampa Bay or somebody that you need some extra, help on the edge blocking. I could see that. And honestly, his route tree was a little more expansive than a guy that like him. But in general, that's really all I see him as. And then Amaris Brown, the defensive back from UNLV, he's a little bit of a sleeper in my opinion. But we have so many defensive backs, it's going to be really tough for him. He has really high end speed, really a good athlete, good instincts, good ball skills. His height is a problem, though, and his tackling. So he's a guy that, is worth keeping an eye on, but I don't expect a lot out of him. And then Anthony Lucas, the defensive end from USC. Size, frame, length. He's a good athlete. Pass rush hands are there. Speed to power's there, but he doesn't have a lot of production. He lacks burst. He lacks anchor, bend, and honestly just play strength kind of in general. So I do like him as a pickup, but obviously some more things, that I would like to see there. So James, what are your thoughts on those?
Well, I don't have too much on Brown, but I do like Kesselman, the tight end from, well, I would say kind of utility because I see him as a potential fullback at times that we can use him in the backfield. I feel and maybe it's just the Michigan theme with this draft. I feel like the Lions were in on Max Bredesen, the fullback from Michigan. However, I feel like the Vikings, as much as I love Max Bredesen, I feel like the Vikings kind of overdrafted him in being a fifth round pick for a fullback. I mean, I do really like him, but um, at least we got a guy who I would think could play a similar style as an undrafted free agent. Once again, kind of grading on that arc. But in terms of Anthony Lucas, I've done a bunch of research on him because he was a name prior to, um, I'd say day three was when I started hearing his name more and more. I didn't know too much about him, so I looked into him, and he was a three-sport athlete in high school, varsity, three varsity sport athlete with football, baseball, and basketball. He's super athletic. He started at Texas A&M, but unfortunately was suspended from the team and and transferred to USC. When I checked out his 2024 tape, he looked to me to be a second round talent. I feel like he could have been in the more Akis young kind of range, if that's what he was bringing to the table in 2025. However, towards the end of the 2024 season, he had a season-ending leg injury, and unfortunately, it never really said what it was. I tried to look this up all sorts, and it just said lower extremity injury. That's all it gave me. And in 2025, it looks like he's just lost some of his explosiveness. It looks like he is not as quick off the ball, not as strong in his power moves and whatnot. So if he can regain, especially with there being no risk as an undrafted free agent, but if he can regain his 2024 style and strength and whatnot, I feel like the Lions might have got an absolute steal here. But that is banking on the upside because he did show a pretty noticeable step back in 2025.
Ryan, what do you got on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I agree on the Lucas thing, especially because if there is one version of taking advantage of an injury that I like, because we've talked about not going after injured players, not going after guys that are dropping because of that, he might be the version where we all know that if somebody does have an injury and then has to come back and they're not 100%, then usually that shows them as not being quite as strong as they were. But some injuries just need that next year to recover, and then they need that next off season to get a full off season. We're going to see that with Aleem McNeil this year. That happened last season, and we got to be ready for that happening, for what happened with McNeil to happen with Brian Branch this year, that he may not be full strength when he comes back, because that's a hard injury to recover from, come back midseason and be, at top form, especially at that position. But if that's happening with Lucas, I'm with you guys. This is a guy that wasn't that far away from some of the groupings that we had in the draft, a lot higher up. So I like. They don't typically go for the traits guys. This guy does have good traits, but he had good performance too, not far removed as still a pretty young guy. So I like that one. Kitzelman, that's an interesting one because the tight ends were all over the place in this draft as far as where they went. Some went a lot higher than we expected. Some went lower. And I'm with you guys that I thought they were in on one of these tight end fullback hybrids. They took Zach Horton last year as a UDFA. He ended up making the team. IU guy, yes, James. But you know, this year I thought they might try to upgrade that position. Bredesen was a good candidate. The guy I was hearing about more leading into the draft from a program that they like was Hayden Large from Iowa too. I kind of thought that would have been a UDFA that they'd be interested in. The Bears picked him up, so I thought that was relevant because, you know, Ben Johnson went out and got him. But I do like Kitzelman. I'm with you, Jace, that, yeah, it seems like the only way he's going to be getting a lot of catches is by surprising people, that he's just, you know, we see that with some of the inline tight ends. You have them inline 9 out of 10 times, and that one time they do pop out, then they're open because we're not used to putting somebody on them. But yeah, I don't mind that as a pickup. I do think they needed depth there. And the other guy I wanted to highlight, I don't know if we're going to talk about him, but Kanena from Cal, that's another position that they kind of needed as far as an inside defensive tackle. So I think he's got one of the best routes to actually making the team, because although we may like some of these other guys, we talked about O'Neal, we talked about Lucas, we talked about some of the other guys, they're Amaris Brown, they're kind of blocked on the roster, whereas Kanena's got some headroom there, I think, and could make an argument to say, hey, yeah, you got a lot of defensive linemen, but you don't have a ton of depth on the interior.
Yeah, funny enough, that's actually exactly who we were going to be talking about next, so it's a perfect segue. But before we get there, I did want to make a comment on the injury, point you made, because it's weird to me how fans of sports can see injuries happen over and over and over, and they go, oh, he sucked his first 4 games back, he'll never be the same again, as if the human body doesn't take time to, heal. And like you said, I mean, Jamison Williams is a great example of that. He's a guy that was injured, came in, really didn't play a lot. People are like, oh, we wasted a first round pick on a kid who can't play. And then it's like, well, you got to bring him back slowly because he didn't have an off season at all. It's not like you just heal up and then you step out and are ready to play football, man. You need some time to get ready. So I do think that was a great point. And then with the nose tackle from Cal, Kanena, or this is the way I was going to say it, Kia Niania, which makes no sense.
That's probably closer, though, because he is one of those hyphenated last names. So it's probably something with a little flourish in there.
I saw that in the show sheet, and I'm just like, yeah, you guys can talk about this.
But yeah, I see him. I do agree with you that he kind of has a little bit more ability to make some, back end of the roster or practice squad. But he's a pure nose. I think he's got a good anchor, good effort. Obviously, the pass rush leaves a little bit to be desired. But as a nose tackle, he. I don't know if you guys will remember John Pennicini. He was a guy I loved in that draft class, and then we went ahead and took him. And then he was a great player for us. And then he just kind of retired, unfortunately. So obviously he had some things going on for him. But this guy kind of reminds me of him in that way. I don't think he'll be necessarily as good in terms of that guy was a 7th rounder who had an immediate impact on our on field on Sundays, but he has that same style of play. But next up, we actually this is probably the biggest name in our UDFA class, Eric Hunter, the linebacker from Morgan State. He was the guy that a lot of people had drafted like 5th round probably because of his production. He was a very highly productive player. Even though it was a lower level, he kind of showed that he has a lot of traits that NFL teams look for. His length and his hands are a big difference maker, I think, for his evaluation as a prospect and his range and speed. He does have a super thin lower half. His fluidity is not great because he has a pretty thin lower half. And his contain is not great, trying to get outside of blockers, his ball location and his awareness and coverage. But this is a guy that has some ability to stick, I think, because we're a little light on linebacker. And this is a guy who was productive in college and has some traits that can kind of, you can build on at the next level. So, James, what's your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, other than Lucas Hunter is by far my favorite UDFA. I haven't found much tape on him, but just looking at his stats, he played 45 games. He had 298 tackles, so just shy of 300 tackles, with 183 of those being solo. Uh, 35 TFLs, 10 and a half sacks, 3 interceptions, 12 passes defended, and 7 forced fumbles. So he can create turnovers between his forced fumbles and interceptions. I mean, there's 10. He's got a little bit of double-digit sacks, over 30 TFLs. Like, so he's just always around the ball, it seems, because that's a lot of work in 45 games. So yes, he played against smaller competition, but these are some elite numbers. And for an undrafted free agent, like literally, what's the harm? Like he's even if he comes into camp and sucks, which I honestly don't think he will. I think besides Lucas, he has the best chance of making the roster as an undrafted free agent. But like even if he's terrible, like what do we waste a week or two? Like it's not like we're paying him huge money or a huge contract, and it's a lot of upside. So while some players from smaller schools like Trey Lance get drafted in the top 5, I will definitely take that upside as an undrafted free agent.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned his contract. One thing I thought was kind of odd about his contract is he signed a 3-year deal worth over $3 million, which obviously I got a lot of flack on Twitter for this because, for some reason people just wanted to attack me about it. But
It's Twitter. That's why you
yeah,
got trouble for
exactly,
it. Yeah.
exactly. No surprise there. But no, he got 175,000 guaranteed, which everybody was like, it's a normal contract because he only got 175 like everybody else. And it's like, right, but you don't normally see undrafted free agents sign a deal for $3 million. I mean, I know the minimum is 875K and everything like that, but I don't know if you guys do math very much. But if you do 875 times 3, it's not 3 million. So they gave him a little bit more than the minimum. So a little bit. Obviously, this was a guy who was probably highly sought after. So I assume that's why. But Ryan, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, clearly that shows some intention here, and I do think that it's a position that they could have used another player, and this is a guy that they clearly identified as somebody that was of value in the UDFA class. He's coming from a class of football that maybe is harder to identify. Also, there was a couple interesting things through his process, kind of looking at him more. Kyle Mosley, who does a lot of analysis of that level of football, was saying, and I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I don't look at anything on my social media, so you can comment. I'm not really going to see it. But they lost Alex Anzalone, and he was actually comparing the tape and saying, hey, he's looking better coming out of college than Anzalone did. And I think we do have to remember the track that Anzalone took in the NFL to a degree too, because even when the Lions picked him up, he was not even he was a borderline starter in New Orleans. He was kind of like a fourth linebacker there. And so, they're not going to try to make him the same player. He, in some ways, the way I saw it was that it's almost like hopefully he's what they wanted James Houston to be. We brought up James Houston a little bit earlier. We talked about the sacks. But the one problem with Houston is he really couldn't do anything else beyond that pass rush. Then he lost some mobility and all of that. So if he does have some actual coverage, linebacking ability beyond the rush, then I think he's got a chance to stick and be a depth piece, because this is a place where they lost some depth. They, Stewart, obviously Anzalone, but they lost a couple bodies here. And so the fact that they added 2 doesn't surprise me, and 2 that do have a likelihood of making the roster or the practice squad.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. To wrap it up, we got three more players, but I'll kind of run through these pretty quick. The defensive back Sean Rucker from USF, I think is kind of a sleeper. I think he might be even more of a sleeper than the other DB I talked about earlier. He's got elite speed. He ran a 4.3 at his pro day. Really high level athlete in general. Really physical player as well, kind of what the Lions look for as a defensive back. And he's got versatility. The dude can literally play outside corner, slot, free safety, or strong safety. So, with all those things said, I would not be surprised if he even somehow makes the roster. And he's got a good frame. He's like 6 foot, 6'1", 180, 185. Obviously, he could add a little bit more weight, but he plays really, really physical. So, like I said, a little bit of a sleeper pick there. And then the guard, Melvin Priestley from Illinois. Versatile player, can play tackle or guard. He did play tackle in college, which obviously he'll play guard in the NFL based on all of his measurables, but does add some versatility there. He's a run blocker, period. His pass blocking is just okay, but as a run blocker, man, he is feisty, he is physical, he is strong, and he's got really active hands. His biggest issue is just agility. He's not a guy you're gonna, have in a zone scheme. He's a gap scheme guy, down blocks and things like that. So, and then Luke Altmaier, the quarterback from Illinois. This guy is a guy that has probably the most potential to actually make the active roster. And the reason I say that is we just don't have a QB3 right now. So having Luke Altmaier be that QB3 would make some sense. He has a little bit of developmental traits, but he's not a guy that I'm gonna say, man, put him behind Goff and we'll be okay. No, I do not feel that way. But he's experienced, he's patient, got good timing, good eyes. He's got some scramble ability. I mean, he ran a 4.7. He showed a little bit on tape that he can kind of move around in the pocket. But his size, his arm strength, his accuracy, his footwork, his poise are all negatives. And one thing that I saw on a scouting report about him that I thought was kind of funny was they mentioned his ball pat being a little bit like worse than most, which is kind of funny because it's like normally people wouldn't notice that, but clearly he's got some issues that he needs to figure out. So not a guy I want to rely on, but could be QB3, I guess, which I would rather go sign a vet, but we'll see how
If
that.
you can't even ball pat right, I don't know, man.
Exactly. Like I said, the negatives are size, arm, accuracy, footwork, and poise. Well, I don't know if you can play quarterback, brother, with those things. So, no, with that, James, what are your thoughts on those last few guys?
The first two I really have nothing on. In terms of Altmaier, I have seen him a little bit at least. I saw a lot of people on Twitter, for what it's worth, say like he's a running quarterback. He's not. He has some scramble ability, I would say, at least in terms of running. It's more of like an prime Aaron Rodgers, like Mahomes, like he can escape out of the pocket and move. Not so much like Fields, where you're gonna have designed quarterback runs for him. So for anyone out there who is listening, I would not call him a running quarterback, but he is more mobile than Goff. Granted, as much as I love Goff, that's not saying much. So
Yeah, very, very good point there. I will say he kind of reminds me of I'm spacing on his name right now, but our QB2 last year in a lot of ways.
Alan,
Kyle Allen, yeah. He kind of reminds me of him in a lot of ways, where it's like he just doesn't offer a lot, but he could be a decent backup in the league, I think. Ryan, what are your thoughts before we get out of here?
Yeah, this draft was interesting with quarterbacks because there was a lot of talk on Mendoza, but he was basically the one franchise quarterback that you could kind of be sure of. Then there was some guys that were questionable, Simpson and others, and we talked about them through the process. But I did think it was a good draft to get a developmental quarterback, a later round quarterback, whoever that was. If it was a Taylon Green, if it was Daniels, some people like the versatility of Haynes King. There's a bunch of interesting names, but Altmaier was kind of at the back end of that. But I do like the fact that they took somebody to develop, because as much as I like Bridgewater and I think he's a good fit for this team, because I do like his presence, and clearly he's there as kind of like I mean, I don't know if he's going to follow the Skipper path of like, okay, he's going to go right from playing to coaching with them, but they do need somebody behind them now that Allen left. So hopefully they can develop this guy without any urgency as far as able to see if they have anything, and then you say, okay, no, we didn't have anything. Let's use some more capital on somebody that we can do something more with, but you didn't spend anything on them. So it's a good flyer, and you know, if they can get something out of them and even make them into a Kyle Allen, that would be that would be a plus.
Yeah, I think Altmaier is a little bit of a steal, if you want to call it that, as an undrafted free agent, because most people thought he would get picked. But like you said, having a developmental quarterback makes a lot of sense. Personally, I would have loved Cole Payton from North Dakota State.
Yeah.
And of course, the Eagles got him, which sucks, as always. Howie Roseman seems to be in my brain sometimes. I don't know if he watches the show, but he does a lot of the things that I want the Lions to do. So I guess great minds think alike. No. With that, that is going to be it for the show. We appreciate you guys for joining us, as always. We will be back next week, as always, with a little bit more draft, like specific, like, or not so specific, I should say, draft coverage with all the other NFL teams. We just felt we need to cover the Lions first because that's who we're here for at the end of the day. So with that, before we get out of here, Ryan, let them know where they can find you.
Sports Intel Ryan on X, and then obviously the Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh and Shane Graham's Extra Points. I'm also covering our other show tomorrow morning, 10 to 12 on Jethro, and we'll have some specific coverage. We're going to have Josh Helmer of Lions Wire on, because I actually want to ask him about one of the things that we were talking about with the Iowa thing, and the fact that because he was covering Iowa when Proctor left the program. So we're going to get some intel on that whole thing and the Iowa prospects and the Lions prospects. So tune in if you want to listen to that. And yeah, feel free to follow me. And if you do comment towards me, I probably won't respond, but feel free to follow. Unless it's nice, then I might.
Well, you know, and I will say the Proctor situation is very odd. So if you are at all interested in that situation, it is definitely worth listening to. So check them out. And with that, we appreciate you guys for joining us. As always, the links are in the description for Fanatics and Stick to the Model. You can find me at JSoSweet. You can find James at Gullet_James, and both of us at MIFB Network and MichiganFootballNetwork.com. With that, that's all we got for you this time. Once again, we appreciate you for joining us, and we will see you guys next week.